Hello, it's Harry for episode 10 of our Euro 2024 preview series. Pleasure to be joined by Scott Coyne of the Belgian Football Podcast. Belgium's an interesting one to get into the nitty gritty of because they've had this golden generation like England have. I'm sure you, as a Belgian football content creator, you're pretty sick of hearing of this golden generation. They've never quite made it, and now they've got a new generation of stars like Doku and Trossard. And is there pressure lifted off their shoulders a bit?
Well, this is an interesting one because I've been saying for a long time now, even right at the end of the golden generation, oops, I said it, the one that was meant to win something. I think everyone's got a golden generation at some point. Yeah, I always said that there was no reason that the next wave of talent coming through wasn't necessarily going to be the one who might actually do something. Because the thing with Belgian football, particularly at an academy level, guys, is that they're very, very strong. So there's always a wave of talent coming through. It's a fantastic country to develop young players. Often they leave Belgium arguably earlier than they should, go to larger leagues and continue to develop their own career, which ultimately helps the national team. I think there was a feeling towards the end of Roberto Martinez's time that they'd kind of blown it in a way. People felt a bit despondent about the fact that they hadn't managed to win anything. But I think that's an unfortunate side effect of being told constantly for a number of years that you should be winning something. England fans will be able to relate to that, I think. But we know that football doesn't really work like that at all. I mean, there's lots of Dutch sides and Spanish sides over the years that arguably really should have won a major tournament, but didn't. And eventually they've both managed to kind of address that. But I think this current generation coming through has a nice balance between having some experience in there and some of that exciting talent finally getting its chance. And Domenico Tedesco, who's been in post since February of last year, has actually done a pretty good job, I think, of blending that together and handling that transition. There's only really been one negative point, I think, over the last year or so, and that's the situation with Thibaut Courtois, the falling out there, which wasn't able to be resolved in a way that I think in the short term the national team are going to benefit from.
And you mentioned, sorry, you go,
on,
Alex.
Harry. No, I was just going to say, whilst on the subject, Scott, we talk about Belgium having this golden generation, and like you rightly said, lots of nations, we could talk about 10, 15 nations playing the Euros having these particular golden sort of generations. But you mentioned England, and whenever England go to a tournament, there's an expectation and the fans get disappointed. I always like to understand what other nations go through as well. So in Belgium, has there been this also? Have the fans held this expectation that you should be winning tournament football?
Well, I think for a little while, I think a lot of fans probably did feel they should be going much closer than they did with that so-called golden generation. I never really felt that way about it. I mean, obviously, I'm not Belgian myself, but having spent a lot of time in Belgium and spoken to Belgian fans about this, both in person and online, I think they're much more relaxed, I would say, generally about it. I think culturally in Belgium, there isn't a massive weight of expectation on the national side, and that's always been the case. Culturally, Belgium has always done is quite self-effacing as a nation. They have France on one side, obviously, and the Netherlands on the other. So both countries that never shut up about being great about everything that they are great about, and usually they're right. And Belgium have this kind of mentality that's kind of, how can I describe it? I suppose it's a bit like saying, okay, we're little Belgium, we're not particularly great at anything, so we're just gonna do our best and get on with it and see what happens. They're very self-effacing like that culturally as a nation, and I actually think that's very endearing because it helps to temper expectations, and it means that when you perhaps do exceed those expectations or start to do quite well, that the natural excitement on the ground that starts to build is stronger and has a bigger impact. I mean, people forget now, those who still want to moan about not having won anything under Roberto Martinez, a third place finish in a World Cup is not something to be sniffed at,
Yeah.
Most countries, will never achieve something like that. And in a parallel world, there maybe is a scenario where they win that tournament. That's a massive achievement for a country of Belgium's size in itself, massive. So I think people are sometimes a little bit ungrateful for what was achieved. And actually, there is a lasting legacy to Roberto Martinez's work as well. He's responsible for a lot of quite positive work in terms of the infrastructure in Belgian football. There's a new training facility, state-of-the-art kind of academy that the players use where they convene before international fixtures. They won't be able to use it too much in this instance, obviously, because they'll be decamping off to Germany. But Roberto spent a lot of time making sure that there was an infrastructure being put into place that would serve the national team well for not just the next generation, but the generation beyond that. And work like that is really, really important, I think. And often fans kind of forget that. So Belgium come into this tournament with, I suppose, positive expectations, really, because they come through this qualifying tour, qualifying against who was in there? Austria, Sweden, Azerbaijan and Estonia, unbeaten. Top scorers, best defence, tick, 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 everything, as good as it gets. England fans often will see this as well. The one caveat in all of this, and it is a big one, is I don't think this side has been tested properly yet, but they're going to be tested shortly, of course. We're about to see the real deal, and that's the unknown here for me.
How does that attacking talent marry together in terms of, obviously, the qualifiers is very different to tournament football, but you've got Doku, you've got Trossard, you've got Lukaku, you've got these big players, to name a few. Is there the same problem with England where it's like, how do you fit all of them in one team, or is it a bit more nuanced than that?
I think in Belgium's case, Domenico Tedesco's been really quite good at playing around with what he's got, and he's actually got, I think the depth of talent there is pretty good. We could argue long into the night about, how good and the strength in various positions. But I think on the whole, he's got some pretty decent raw ingredients to work with there. And I think he's been very fair as well. Although he's stuck tactically, by and large, to the same approach during qualifying, he's played around a little bit with starting positions, even though he's kept the same formation. So he has kept an open mind about who might be best in certain positions, and hasn't done what Roberto Martinez was often criticised for, sometimes fairly, and that is sticking too closely to an inner circle of players that he wanted to work with and trusted. So he has given opportunity to players, and kind of continues to do that. And something to watch out for, I think, is the goalkeeping position. Obviously, with the fallout with Courtois, Koen Casteels and Matt Sells will now fight it out, as they have been for a while, during qualifying to start in the tournament. And although I suspect rather strongly that Domenico already knows who he's going to start in the tournament, nobody else really knows at the moment. And that's something to kind of watch out for, I think. And he did interchange the two of them a fair bit towards the end of qualifying, when he knew that Courtois was not going to be, when he decided himself. Obviously, the injury's been a factor, but the personal decision was already made when their relationship went down the pan.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that, Scott. You mentioned Domenico Tedesco's taking over this team, trying to stamp his own authority. And I think with Martinez, we saw a manager try and play very expressive football with the flair players he had, like you said, the players he trusted, and those big names. But I was fortunate to watch England against Belgium very recently at Wembley, and I was extremely impressed with Belgium. I expected to see this expansive football and this, these glorious players trotting around the pitch. And what I actually saw was a very well organised team who were able to keep the ball, play football, but also be very, very patient. And they hit England, if you watch the goals, on two very, very quick, concise counter attacks with Lukaku breaking with the ball and crossing to Tielemans. I think Tielemans scored two. And I think we're seeing a Belgium team which is, dare I say it, set up quite nicely for tournament football. They've got the look of a team now who can go into these difficult matches, sit back, soak up pressure, and they've got the players to hurt teams as well. I think we're looking at a new beast with Belgium going into Euro 2024. I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to win it, but I think we're going to see Belgium do well at this competition and go deep, and maybe, I wouldn't say surprise us, but be a little bit more surprised at the type of Belgium team we see at this tournament.
I think that's a fair comment. I mean, I think they are at the moment. I would say that there's a greater tactical flexibility to this side now than arguably there was under Roberto Martinez. Roberto had a certain system that he stuck to, which most coaches do. The biggest criticism of him was his refusal to deviate from that, particularly when it was rather obvious what the weaknesses were. So you come into knockout football under Roberto and a number of tournaments, and the plan doesn't change. There is essentially no plan B. It's just the personnel that are rotated, if you like. It's slightly different under Domenico. I think, although he has a preferred way of playing, there is a greater degree of interchangeability with individual players and also as a team unit as well, which is obviously very important. It's all very well to rely on individuals, and Belgium will have to rely on big players performing well at this tournament. But it's important that if he can get some of those players who wouldn't necessarily be considered to be the top performing players performing well in support of Romelu Lukaku and Kevin De Bruyne, then something quite interesting could happen here. If Doku has a great tournament, if Johan Bakayoko turns up, which he has done at club level, he's had a brilliant season at club level. Dori Lukebakio, who actually plays in the same position as Johan Bakayoko. I think I've really enjoyed watching him in qualifying. He's really started to produce an output for the national team as well, and clearly really enjoys playing in that shirt, which is important. And arguably the most important thing of all is I think these players have bought into what he wants to do. I mean, the Courtois situation could have been a real problem for him beyond the initial falling out, because you could have seen a situation where the players divided into different camps, and that was a real problem for them, coming into this tournament, and that hasn't happened. So what was a really unpleasant public slagging match, and something that Courtois, I personally, my own view in that is, I don't think he's come out of this very well personally, to be honest. I think Tedesco made some mistakes, maybe in how he handled that captaincy situation, but I think Courtois running a kind of campaign of sorts and trying to stir things up in the mainstream media through his own influences, I don't think really helped him at all. And Tedesco kind of obviously decided very quickly after that point that he had to, cut him out, and we're not going to see Courtois back in a Belgium shirt, I don't think, as long as Domenico Tedesco's around, and he's going to be around at least until the next World Cup, because he's just signed a 2-year contract extension. So we can criticise some of his choices around, how he handled that relationship, but he's done the one thing you would want somebody to do in that situation, and that is make a firm decision either way and stick to it. And the players, I think, haven't fallen out with him over that. So that tells me that, they might not agree with his decision on that particular player, but they're in.
Lastly, I've just got a burning question from my side, which is unrelated to the national team, but is kind of related, and I think you know what it would be, is what do you make, or what is actually more importantly, what's the perception in Belgium been to the Vincent Kompany Bayern news? Because obviously that's come as a shock to quite a lot of us in the team. So I was just interested in what the Belgian perspective is.
Well, I think it's probably shocked us as well, if I'm honest. I did actually say to somebody yesterday, am I the only one that's a little bit surprised by this? It's varying degrees of surprise, I think, depending on who you are. I think there's a little bit of frustration at the Burnley end, I think, because I think they feel like um, Big Vinny, who I've always admired, did a pretty good job at Anderlecht and was given short shrift for it. Unfortunately, they're doing a little bit better at the moment, but it's taken them a little while to recover from parting company with him when they did. No pun intended. Yeah, I mean. I think it's taken pretty much everybody by surprise. I can understand why he's a candidate of interest to Bayern, because he's simply very good. He's very good at developing players, and arguably his greatest strength is people look up to Big Vinny. Not only young players who work under him, but senior players and other people around him, not necessarily on the frontline coaching staff as well. He's one of those personalities that can pull people together and people warm to. He's got a charisma and a warmth to him that rubs off on people that, you can't, you can't buy that off other people. You've either got it or you haven't. So there's a really positive element to what he brings to a football club that goes beyond just the coaching element of it. And I think at a club like Bayern, which is, I mean, it's a slight cliche to say it, but it is a dynasty thing. They look for more than a coach. I think you're kind of scouting for a personality, because, as I was saying, I think Vinny has those things that Bayern look for beyond the impact in a coaching sense. He's somebody that can inspire people to go that little bit further and achieve that little bit more. And there's a really small number of coaches in the game, I think, who've got that in the locker. And he definitely does. So I think that's why he's rocketed to the front of their interest. The biggest surprise is how quickly this has happened. I'm not surprised they're seriously interested, but this has happened really, really quickly. And Bayern tend to take their time with things. They're very decisive when the decision's made, but, because they're German, obviously, they do their due diligence, they do all of their analysis, and that tells me actually that they've had their eye on him for a little while, to be honest, and the situation at Burnley just happens to be a bit of a coincidence.
Brilliant. That's very insightful. I mean, I hadn't really considered those qualities in Kompany since he'd been in the Prem. I had, obviously, when he was in the Championship, but you kind of have a short-term memory in football sometimes when results don't go the way of a manager. Alex, did you have anything finally to add or anything to ask?
Yeah, what I just want to finish off with, Scott, obviously you being the expert on the Belgium team, is you look at this league, the group they're in, Slovakia, Romania, Ukraine, arguably on paper, you look at that and you think it's a little bit of a walk in the park for Belgium. You should see them qualify. We know there's no easy game in the internationals, but rest a few legs, keep a few people fresh going into the sort of knockout phases. How do you fancy Belgium's chance on lifting the Euro trophy at last?
Well, that's the question I dreaded the most, putting my neck on the line with that one. Well, I think the draw's been very, very kind to them. They were very, very quiet after the draw, and deliberately trying to say nothing, which I think said everything. It did to me anyway, and that told me that they're absolutely delighted with it, and they should be. I mean, it could have been worse, but the truth is they should be winning that group, and the way the fixtures have fallen as well have also been kind to them. They don't play Ukraine, who I would argue in a number of ways are arguably going to be the most difficult fixture for them in the group stage. Doesn't always work out that way, but they're playing them last, so the job could be done in terms of qualifying by that stage, which obviously helps as well. I think a minimum expectation, obviously, is the round of 16. That would allow them to say, look, this has been a successful tournament, and we can prove that because we've made progress. I think they can realistically go to the quarterfinals. I don't think that's unrealistic for them. If you get to that stage, of course, anything can happen, and that would allow them to say it's been very successful, regardless of what happens at that point. But Dominic Tedesco is going to continue working with these players probably until the next World Cup in a couple of years and go there as well, unless something very dramatic happens in the short term, which I don't expect it to. Although his representatives did have, just to throw something interesting into the mix here, his representatives just a couple of weeks ago did have a meeting with Milan. These things aren't normal, representatives meet with clubs and agents of other people all the time to, sound people out on different levels. But he's attracting attention already because he's done a very good job in that first year or so, which isn't surprising. But yeah, I mean, I think round of 16 minimum for me. Very possibly the quarterfinals at least. Anything other than the 16 is obviously a problem for them and would be make for some difficult press probably.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating, Scott. I find it so interesting to, I know we look at teams and we look at players, but it's so interesting to get that sort of, real sort of insight into how a nation and people who observe the national team on a regular basis, how they see things, and it's very interesting to see, isn't it, Harry?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I think you're being a bit kind to the expectations as well. I think there's going to be more that they can do than just the quarters, but I think there's so many good teams we've spoken to already. It is a challenge when someone's going to miss out. So yeah, it is tough. But thank you very much, Scott. And
it's been a pleasure. Nice to chat to you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. It's been an absolute pleasure, and all the best to Belgium.
Yeah, good luck. But I presume you're supporting Scotland.
I get asked that all the time, and if I'm truly honest, my allegiances lie more with Belgium than they do with Scotland. Actually, but they have done for a long time, so that's not a change for me. But I certainly will be watching Scotland's fixtures as well.
Good to
Brilliant.
hear.
Well, we won't tell our Scottish correspondent Charles Davey that, but never mind. Another topic for another day. But thank you very much, Scott. Pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, guys.